All right, guys, let's get started. All right, thank you guys for coming. We are calling this night Many Shades of the Church. And we're calling it Many Shades of the Church because the church is made up of a diverse body where each member is a necessary and essential part. And during this time, when our country has been reeling from the deaths of Black people and our social conscience has woken up to its anti-Blackness, it seems like the church has been trying to find meaning, right? Meaning from what recently happened, meaning from what's been happening for hundreds of years, meaning for what it looks like to move forward as a church. And so our hope is that our community, that we could try to find meaning together. So we're going to try to take that first step tonight into finding meaning. And the way we're structuring our night tonight is the first portion is going to be 6 Black members of our family are going to share personal stories. So they're going to share 2 things. One is going to be about an aspect of the Black experience that's been really close to them, that really is heavy on their hearts. And then 2, they're going to be sharing how they've been processing recent events as a Christian. So I give them the option of either sharing both or either of them. So we'll hear from 6, and then we'll have another time of a Q&A. So thank you guys for submitting awesome questions. We're going to spend 30 minutes answering some of those questions, and then we'll do 30 minutes of answering questions that anyone has here. If anyone has questions and doesn't want to ask it in the public forum and would like to privately message me, we could do that too. But that will be how our night is going to be structured. Just a few disclaimers. And I've told all the people sharing here that the purpose of them sharing isn't to share and educate us of the history of racism in our country and their thoughts on the overall like Black experience. And it's not to teach us like, hey, this is what like all Black people are thinking. But they're going to be sharing their own personal stories. And we'll see that even as they're sharing, there's going to be varying differences in how they've been processing their own experiences. And hopefully that's what we're valuing. We're valuing what each of them are going to be sharing with us. So let me pray for us, and then we're going to share by alphabetical order from first name. So Ashley will be our very first person to share with us. Let me pray for us. God, I thank you that your heart has always been restoration, that the reason why you sent Jesus for us is to restore us unto you. And we see that everywhere of how you've been moving, not only in scripture, but how you've been moving in our own personal lives, that the work that you do is to fix the things that sin has marred. So God, I pray tonight, would you give each of us here, God, a deeper understanding of your Father's heart, of the things that you care deeply for, the things that you are doing to bring restoration. And God, we want to catch what you're doing, and we want to be a part of what you're doing. So God, would your spirit come and lead and guide our time here tonight? God, would you protect it? God, would you lead it, guide it? God, would your spirit come and do a work in our own hearts? So God, we thank you, God, that's always been your heart. Come and do that work with us here tonight. We give this night to you. God, come. We pray all these things. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, let's welcome our sister Ashley.
All right. Hi. I will be talking about self-hate. That's something that has been very heavy on my heart for most of my life, even up until this point. So I grew up in a Christian private school that was predominantly white. My biggest issue when I was growing up and even till now was self-hate. When schools are teaching you that white people came to fix countries, that they fought wars to help free slaves, and teach you very little about the accomplishments of your own people other than Black History Month, um, it gave me a feeling that true leaders and true change could only happen through white people, specifically white men. And as a third grader, so around the age of 8, I was able to convey that I didn't want to be Black, and I wished my mother wasn't either. Um, and considering my mother passed away when I was 12, and knowing what I know now about the struggle that Black women go through, it saddens me to this day because I can't take those words back. Um, and unfortunately, my story is not uncommon for little Black kids who grew up in predominantly white communities. I've had 6-year-olds tell me when I was teaching that they wish that they were not Black, or they would want long straight hair. And I have talked to many of my Black friends who grew up in the same type of atmosphere, and they've said the same stuff to their parents. It's not normal for a young child, especially at the age of 6, to be able to already establish the concept that they don't like themselves. It's so common that Black parents also almost brace for impact when it comes, because it's inevitable in today's society. Another huge issue, predominantly in white schools, is that there are low expectations for Black students to not perform well academically, almost giving them a pass. I've expressed in my high school, high school math teacher, and I asked her if I could take a summer course because I wanted to get in honors math because I was pretty decent in the level I was at, and she told me not to, because if I failed the class in the summer, it was a waste of time and my money. And that was not the first time a teacher has told me that. I've had teachers tell me not to go into science education when I was in college because it's hard. Um, and so that discouraged me. If any student is told by their role models that don't even bother trying because you're going to fail anyway, it's a waste of time, then what is that child going to do? And so it discouraged me, and it bothered trying anymore. And thankfully, my family knocked some sense into me and knew that I truly love science, and I indeed went to school for science education, and I successfully have the degree. But as a Black teacher, I'm constantly trying to build up my Black students, all of my students, of course, but it's really detrimental, really important to Black students to tell them that they like to love themselves for who they are, and to set goals and not take risks. To take risks and not to coast. I do that because I wish I had more teachers who did that for me. But what was really a source of my self-hate for me was the many issues I had in regards to looks, and how my friends played a huge part in my insecurities. They would only compliment me when I had straight, long extensions, so it conditioned me to think that I was only beautiful with long European hair. I have people to this day tell me that Black girls are ugly and loud and dark, but because of my lighter skin, they tell me I'm one of the prettier ones, though, to make me feel better. And it doesn't. You're basically telling me that I'm pretty in a group that is normally not seen as pretty. So good for you. But on the other side, when I'm in my white community, I'm overlooked because I'm not like them. I have darker skin tone than them. And they felt the need to tell me that I should change my appearance to make me attractive. And I believed them. And till this day, I still have non-Black people telling me what I need to change about myself, whether it be in passing or in the dating scene. And when I went on dates, I had a guy tell me to my face, if I had long straight hair, I would look more feminine, and that it's a shame because of my lighter skin tone, because of the fact I spoke white, the only thing that was tripping him up was the fact that my hair was too kinky. And it made me wonder to this day if there's anyone who would truly appreciate me for how I naturally look, but most importantly, love me for my character. And due to the fact that I grew up in a predominantly white community, the way I talk seems to be a topic of conversation for some people, for both the white community and the Black community. If you haven't heard the term code switching, it's to alternate between two or more varieties of language and conversation. There are many Black peoples who navigate between two communities because if they were to talk in a certain way, it would come off to others in our workplace that we're not as intelligent. And so they would treat us as such. And so we switch when the situation calls for it. For me, my parents actually punished me when I would talk in slang when I was younger. They wouldn't let me listen to rap. I didn't find out until my late high school career that there was a section called Christian rap. I was like, who's the cray? But personally to this day, I really still don't care for rap. But so I grew up only talking proper, which isolated me incredibly from my Black community. And add on the fact that I was very emo, it didn't help my case. I got the title Oreo, which is Black on the outside, white on the inside. The most common phrase that my friends would say to me and to other people about me was, Ashley is technically white. We don't even consider her as Black. I constantly have to prove my Blackness to my community and was rejected by the white community because I didn't look like them. It left me in the middle, isolated, and I was willing to do anything and everything to not feel this way. So for a long time, I complied to everyone's wishes of how I should be or how I should look, regardless of how I felt. I was consciously denying my true self and almost playing a role so that people would want to get to know me. It was as if my mind had a back room and my real self was locked away, and the role that was scripted for me was at the forefront. I exhibited forced compliance behavior, creating a cognitive dissonance, which is having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change, which causes physical trauma and creates anxiety disorders if it gets bad enough. And unfortunately for me, that is the case. I hated myself and my personality, and I just wished for so long to be the role I put on for others. To this day, it takes me a long time to show my true self to people. And to this day, I'm not quite sure if my actions and some of my decisions and interests are ones that are that of my own or me trying to subconsciously conform. And every day I work to dismantle that with some help from others as well. But in regards to my spiritual walk, during this time, I find myself asking a lot, how can I love those who don't care about me? Why should I care about them when they don't value my own life? And to have friends who I've confided in and choose to remain complicit and don't care because it doesn't affect them. It hurts more, especially when those people call themselves Christians or those who say that they are Christian, but they say if a group of Black people start to cause trouble on their street, shoot, light them all up. I don't care. The fact that there are people in the Christian church as a whole can say those things and not care is mind-boggling to me. It feels very hypocritical. It almost confirmed my fears in trusting the church. I have to keep reminding myself that at the end of the day, we're human and we have sinful tendencies, and I'm trying to find forgiveness through it all, but it's very hard for me now more than ever. I know the answer is that we're called to love and forgive because that's what Jesus did for us, but my heart is extremely torn, and it's something that the Lord is working with me at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Just a word. Each person here is sharing extremely courageously. So yeah, thank you to everyone who is going to be sharing today. Next up, we have our brother Brandon.
Hello. So I'm going to be, okay, sorry. First, I have to apologize. I know Chris said that this wouldn't be a history lesson, but there's a small history lesson attached. Just gonna throw that disclaimer out there. So I will be talking about my experiences with racism in the church and slavery in the church, and how my journey of coming to God has been affected through that. So in light of all of the recent events, police shootings, protests, demands for systemic change that have been happening over the past few months or so, I've struggled with a lot personally. But one thought that has been coming back a lot is just the idea of how Black people should respond to the church. So way back in the day, back before I accepted Christ, one of the major barriers to entry for me was the fact that the Bible was used to justify slavery. I couldn't accept that. I couldn't accept a God that was willing to use horrible atrocities to spread his own glory. And I couldn't allow myself to love someone that let things like racism be his tool to make himself more known. Uh, for those of you wondering what kind of verses, it's one of them. One of the major verses that always comes up is verses like Ephesians 6:5. Slaves, obey your masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Those kinds of verses would instantly ruin my desire to read the Bible. Even after coming to Christ, for a long time, I just tried to justify those verses, looking into the historical context of them to kind of soften the word slave for myself. Translated it as bondservant so that it doesn't sound as bad. Skipped over them, whatever I needed to do to not think about it. But at the end of the day, I still couldn't excuse it. Yeah, and as all my friends started, all of my Black friends and Hispanic friends as well, started leaving the church for similar reasons, I kept hearing things like, Christianity is the white man's religion. You can't be pro-Black and a Christian. Recently, those same thoughts and a lot of those same sentiments have been, shared with me again, and those same thoughts have been coming back a lot. Yeah, and as much as those thoughts can sometimes give me a space to be angry at someone for all of the injustice happening to Black people, I don't believe it. Um, the fact does still remain, however, that Christianity was used to oppress many people, and in this case, specifically Black people. So sometime, sorry, there was a very loud car outside. So sometime in my last year of college, I took a Black history course. I was fully prepared to hear more of the same rhetoric about how Christianity and being Black weren't compatible. But God showed me something else. This is where the history lesson comes in. Uh, uh, if, yeah. So in the earliest days of the slave trade, and I'm talking about like the 1600s, slaves actually were not permitted to become Christian. In fact, most slaveholders at the time believed enslaved Black people to be too barbaric to be capable of Christianity. Slave masters would not let slaves become Christians. They were concerned with the use of their bodies and not the salvation of their souls. They didn't want enslaved Africans to think of themselves as equal to white men in any way, and they didn't want them to experience the freedom that they would have if they were to know Christ or if they could read the Bible. So they weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to come to Christ. It wasn't until the 1650s and 1660s that a group of people called assimilationists came and changed the scope of things. Now, I know assimilationists sounds like a really nice group, but they're actually just as bad. So they came up with the idea that if Black people were taught the gospel, it would somehow make them more docile and therefore more obedient slaves. At first, this was definitely met with a lot of resistance. People weren't happy about it, and then eventually it became the normal practice to make sure that all slaves were educated in the Bible and had this idea in their head that they had to obey their masters, specifically, like I said, Ephesians 6:5 and other verses from the Old Testament were horribly misused to continue that mindset. So with that, so that thought actually really changed the way that I looked at slavery in the gospel, because what I realized was that the fact that someone wanted very much for my ancestors' souls to be lost, just so that they can continue to use their bodies, was mind blowing to me. And then even more so to use this book of peace, to use this thing that brings about freedom to do the exact opposite of that was just so horrible, and I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that uh, even one slave ever did become saved. Um, why would they want to? It's just yeah, the fact that something was used to destroy their faith in God and then used to uh, create a false faith in God was just awful. Now, at the same time, uh, as I was thinking about this and praying on it, one of the things that God reminded me of is that the Black church has a very deep history in the gospel, and it's very uh, deeply rooted in Black culture to be, and especially in Black American culture, to have the gospel. It is um, Black people have made major contributions to the gospel, and I just couldn't accept the idea that um, being Christian and being Black weren't uh, compatible. Um, it took me a long time to get through this, to be honest, in recent times, it comes up every so often, and I still have to fight it back. But what I realize is that God never intended for um, my Blackness to be seen as something that uh, was evil. Um, and he never intended for it to be seen as something that made me lesser than someone else. But uh, as is clearly written in his word, his love is for all people. He really does care for everyone. Um, and even aside from how slaves are treated, God was still able to plant a seed of love in at least one person's heart, and more than that, in millions of people's hearts. Uh, the fact that God was able to create something like that under those circumstances really just shows how much He actually does care for Black people and for all people. It's not just, as I'm constantly told, the white man's religion. It's love really is for everyone. And it took me a long time to really come to that conclusion. And yeah, so that was the history lesson and part of my own story. Uh, now, in recent times, like I said, those thoughts have come up again. Um, a lot of which actually has to do with some injustices I felt in a different church, not this one. Um, but yeah, so recently I reconnected with an old friend of mine. She is a white female. She used to go to the same high school as me. We were kind of dating in high school. Yeah, it was great. Um, yeah, I she was new to the faith. I was just starting to, come back to it myself. Uh, and I took her to a um, Bible study that with friends. Now, to be clear, I've been going to this Bible study since eighth grade. I've been friends with all of these people to this day. Actually, to this day, I still am really close friends. I still go see them when I go back home. Yeah, I took her to Bible study one day. And after I, there was a moment in which we were kind of separated. I and her and a friend of mine, or someone who I thought was a friend of mine, were left alone. This friend takes her aside and he says to her, um, "Stop throwing yourself at him. What are you, some type of N-word lover?" Uh, and then he proceeds to tell her, um, "What do you have, like jungle fever?" and just kind of continue to attack her that way. She recently told me that story, um, and she made it very clear that that was a defining moment for her and that she never went back to church again after that. She saw it in, she saw, for her, the fact that someone could continue to smile in my face and be outwardly a Christian and pretend to love people for so long, and then turn around and do that was enough for her to never want to come back to Christ. Um, and at first, I didn't want to believe this. Well, she told me the story, and I kind of instantly knew who it was because that wasn't the first time something like that had happened. Uh, we had lost many um, members of that group, uh, Black members of that group, and other people of color because of little things that you would say here or there. Um, yeah, I think the point of this story is to kind of tie in the fact that this isn't something that just happened in the 1600s. Um, it's still very much alive and well today, and people are still very much turned off to the gospel because of it. Uh, whether that be my friend uh, or some of my other friends who also left. Um, even I was really close to leaving. Uh, yeah, the story obviously carries a lot of hurt for me, as it's hard for me to get through this now. Uh, yeah, I just wanted to say that, we all have ingrained prejudice inside of us, and it's really easy to um, hide that. Uh, it makes it very hard for someone like me, someone who's Black, to know who to trust, to know who you can, you know, believe in the church, in any church. Uh, yeah, um, that's my yeah, uh, that's my story. That's it.
Brandon, thank you for sharing. Our next, we have our brother Charmer.
All right. So I'm going to be sharing about just the wish to be treated more as an individual rather than as a member of my race, and then just sharing like 3 instances in which that come to mind in my past in which I honestly felt more like I was treated like as a member of my race rather than just me. Um, I always grew up just thinking that, and till this day, I think that like similar to like occupation, which I shared at like a grad night, that my race is just kind of like one of the least important aspects of like who I am as an individual, just because you can find people of all different personalities in every single race, and you can find people that are very similar in all different races. Um, so I always like try to treat everybody as an individual and not really care what they look like. Um, but there were 3 instances that really deal that really stick with me to this day. The first instance was um, just I think the only real instance of racism that I can really remember um, that I just could not ignore or could not like um, sidestep it at all. Um, my brother actually had a friend when we were living in a small town in Louisiana. Um, and it was just very simple. Like we just walked down the street, crossing a ditch, going to his house, and we would play video games, do that for like several months. And then all of a sudden, and he was white, and he just enjoyed he had my brother over, and then he had him and me over. This was, I think my brother was about 7th grade or so, and I was in ninth. Um, and yeah, after a while, all of a sudden, one day we just were not allowed to go to his house anymore. And when asked why, his my my brother's friend had to tell my brother that his mom didn't want Black people at his house anymore. And it really shocked us because we had been going to his house for several months, and she had seen us there. And he was allowed at our house too. He never came to our house. And it just was like, why? We've been in your house already like several times, and we just sat down, played video games, and then when the sun went down, we left. So it really hurt us with like growing up in like a mixed or predominantly black schools and neighborhoods. It really just shocked us that people really thought that way still. So that really did strike me. Um, my next two experiences were kind of similar. Well, my second experience is like similar to what Ashley was referring to earlier. Was actually my freshman year of high school. The first after my first cross country practice, um, there was like a bus that takes us to our homes instead of just having our parents pick us up, because most of us in my school, we weren't actually allowed. Our parents couldn't actually afford to just pick us up from practice. I just remember, and this was actually like a member of like everybody on this bus was black, so it was actually really shocking that this was the bus ride. I walked in and I'm like a little, small, very very thin kid with glasses, very nerdy looking. Um, and all of a sudden, this one guy on the football team just starts berating me, um, and he's just like, like, what is up? Like, it was like, what's up with you? Like, why you got glasses on? Take your glasses off, sag your pants, do all these things. It's like, why do you talk like that? Like, and essentially, like, one of them joined in, and they said something that it comes up in a lot in the black community. It says that he said, "Oh, I'm going to take away your black card." It's basically another way of calling me an Oreo and saying that like, okay, you're not allowed to be a black person anymore if you're going to act like that. So it basically kind of stuck with me, as in like in their eyes, I had to act a certain way to be black. I can't wear glasses. I can't put my pants above my waist. I can't, you know, talk with normal English and all of that. And it just really like disheartened me that like even in the black community there's some form of like this is how you have to conform in order to be considered black. Um, Instead of just saying, okay, you're black because of your skin color and everything else is just an addition on top of that. The third thing was like not as it didn't actually affect me as it affected my mom, because I'm still like in a good sense with this lady today. She's actually the mother of my best friend from high school, and I guess, she's an immigrant from Mexico. He's like first generation um, American from Mexico, and we were best friends. We ran cross country together, and we spent a lot of time at each other's houses. And it was kind of funny. And then my mom would also be at her house as well. So it'd actually be funny. So when she would see me or see my brother, um, and we were actually so close that my mom called, she still calls my friend her son, her third son. And then she called, like, my best friend's mom also calls me her son as well. But for a while at first, she would call me. It was like, "Oh, my black sons are here. Oh, my black sons here." And after a while, I didn't really care about it. I was just like, whatever. It was like, maybe it's like she's like the only black person that she interacts with, and it's like that wasn't really the case. But eventually, my mom had to check her. She just basically was like, "Look, you can't just like I know that you really like my son, but you can't be calling him your black son. Just call him your son. Like the fact that he's black is irrelevant. Because like he's black, and so what? He's still just call him your son. He's just him. And so like my mom also instilled that idea in me of just like treat me as an individual. Don't treat me as a member of my race. Just because I'm black, you don't have to bring it up. That's what breeds a lot of that racism. So thankfully that was actually like the last time she referred to me as her black son. And yeah, so those three events really like stick out to me, that like oftentimes it's weird to see. And one thing that I hate about seeing that breed of racism is that like, yeah, obviously the first thing that you'll notice about me is that I'm a black male, but once you talk to me, like and you talk to any one of us, like any one of you, is like, yeah, you'll see somebody's what they look like, their race, their gender, or gender expression, what have you. Um, but once you talk to them, that is when you actually get to know them. And the more and more you get to know somebody, the less those physical features are relevant. Um, but I guess the way that I've been processing through it, processing through what's been happening, um, I guess it's a lot. I guess the one thing that really has stood out to me when I've been trying to figure out how to even process with it through as a Christian is just, it's going to sound very generic, but we have to continue fighting and speaking out against it. But I guess the Lord told me one thing, and it actually hurt me to say, or hurt me to realize, is that show that because this world is so broken, I was thinking, like, I can't think of a sin that has fully been eradicated from this world. And no sin will be eradicated from this world until Christ has come back. You think of anything, there's nothing that has stopped completely, including slavery. So it is hard. It is heartened. It's like sometimes it's a bit disheartening to realize that we can obviously minimize how often the killings like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor have happened, but unfortunately they won't go away. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting, and it's going to be just a never-ending fight. But it's just about just trusting him. But there's not really anything that I can say about personally within the church that's as personal as what Ashley or Brandon have shared, that I can share about just my Christian walk as a Black man within this church or in previous churches. Just because before coming to GCC is the first church that I've gone to that wasn't predominantly Black. So yeah, it's a struggle. So that's basically all that I have to share.
Thank you, Charmer. We have our sister Ijiro.
Hey, you guys. My name is Ijiro. I'm Nigerian American, hence the name. But I grew up in New York City, born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and I grew up in a very diverse household and diverse community, but it was predominantly Hispanic, Boricuas, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Bengalis, immigrants, and we were one of the few Nigerians. But for me, I would have to say my experiences in coming to terms with the fact that I am Black originated in just that exposure to anti-Blackness whenever I meet different ethnicities, and it'll be little things. For example, first grade, my best friend was Chinese American, Eva Jiang, and every year I would get the little red envelopes for Chinese New Year. And then even her grandmother will come up to me and smile and just pat me on the back or something like that. And then one day Eva told me, she was just like, usually my mom doesn't like Black people. And this was because I asked her, there was Khalil, and he's a little Black kid who's also in our grade. And for some reason, her grandmother, pulled Eva away from Khalil, one day, and I noticed it and I asked her about it. She nonchalantly said, my grandma usually she doesn't like Black people because they think they're poor and dirty and dangerous. But because she sees me with you, you're okay. Yeah. And I was just I don't know why. Maybe it's because I was young and I was in first grade. I brushed it off. But looking back at it, I really want to say that because growing up in a Nigerian household, we had immigrant mentality, and we still do, in terms of it doesn't matter your skin color, whoever's going to treat you bad, it doesn't matter. You work hard and you can make it. There's no excuse for you. So it's always that playing on the back of my mind, as well as don't be like the Black Americans here who blame the white man for everything. So that was the type of sentiment that I was growing up with. But I also had Black friends. I had friends from every race. So I just pushed that on the side of my head and just okay, it's not about my skin color. I just have to work hard and I'll be wherever I want to go. However, upon Upon growing up in the Bronx, especially in the South Bronx, I noticed certain things. For example, I was born with asthma, and I didn't think that it was so different because a lot of my friends who I grew up with also was born with asthma, and like it became so prolific to the point where like we'll show each other our little inhalers and compare inhalers, like, oh, mine has like a prettier color than you. So I thought it was like it was fine until like I started like reading books, getting educated around middle school when I went to school in Harlem. And I noticed that not too many people, like, it wasn't the thing like, oh, show me your inhaler. You know, that wasn't a thing. So I went to the library and I started going on the internet. Google wasn't popping then, but I did one on Google. And that's when I saw that the Bronx is also known as the Asthma Valley. And because of like it didn't hit me until I went to like planning school, but like these policies were racist. And like to touch up on Brandon, I won't dive into deep history, but in the 60s, 50 to 60s, when New York City and a lot of cities around the world were trying to find, around the United States, were trying to find out ways to like integrate the highway system and connect cities from one region, especially the suburbs, into the inner city. They would target minority neighborhoods. And some people say like a proxy, oh, it's the low income neighborhoods will get this and low income happen to be like minority. One, even if that was true, that's still messed up. So that can't even be used as like an excuse like, oh, it wasn't racist, it's because it was low income. You're still wrong for that. But there was a study that was shown, and I'll link the study if anyone is interested or you could hit me up, that basically even among like Black and brown communities that were of high and middle income, they still were placed with environmental toxins, such as waste incinerators, such as what's happening in the South Bronx. So long story short, it was environmental racism, which is the name of the game for my story, in terms of I grew up with a bunch of high expressways that once again were built back in the 50s or 60s, in which planners looked in terms of like which neighborhoods will bear the brunt of all of these like crossways, and like no one would resist or no one would care. And it was these communities such as my own. So for me, that was my eye-opening moment in terms of like up until that point, I knew that people would like say something about my skin, especially me being dark skinned, in terms of like, oh, why is your hair like that? Oh, dark skinned girls are ugly, etc., etc. I always thought that was internal, that like me, just like me working hard and letting people see my personality. And if they don't like me, there's nothing I could do. But it was in that realization when I saw that there were specific laws in place and continue to be in place that in which like said to me like, oh, being Black is like a deficit, you know? So that's where I'm coming from. I will get into it more as we go on throughout, but I don't want to hold all you guys' time. But thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ajiro. All right, we have our sister Jalisa sharing.
Hi everyone. I made a cheesy little slideshow, so I'm gonna share my screen so you can all see it. Um, so pretty much, my name is Jaleesa. I'm 31 years old, and I've lived in West Philly my entire life, and I currently am in West Philadelphia tonight. Um, and I'm gonna say some things about me. I first started attending GCC as a YA in May of 2015. Um, and I quickly started attending my first family group soon after. Um, I have a strong sense of love for the YA community at GCC's UC site. And I met so many amazing people and had fellowship with a lot of times over the years. And this is one of the reasons why I still attend GCC till this day. So my topic today is kind of simple. I'm going to talk about my first name and its origins and kind of like its some sort of connection to my race. Um, I would say that my first name is unique and a little weird. It might be hard for some people to say or spell, or even more harder to remember. Um, but my name's not that common. Um, I would say that it, I can't go into a store to buy my name on a pencil or anything like that. Um, it's but it's my name and it's perfect for me and it fits me well, and I can still get personalized stuff with my name on it or make art with my name on it. It'll be like kind of the same. um I would say that it marks me as a person better than my last name does. Some people's last name is a good for them, is a marker of their heritage and their origins. But for me, that's not the case. My last name's McCrae. It's Irish, but I don't think I'm anywhere. I don't think I have any Irish blood in me. But I'm definitely identify as African American, and so my name is African American. Um, my name means promise of God. Um, and the reason for that is the name Jaleesa is a variation on the name Lisa, Lisa. It's practically the name Lisa with the ja put in front of it. Adding prefixes to traditionally Western sounding names is a very common practice in the African American community, especially during the late 80s when I was born. Common examples of this tradition can also be seen in names like LaShawn, DeAndre, and Latasha. Lisa is a variation and a shortening of the Hebrew name Elizabeth, which means oath or promise of God. Therefore, many like baby book names tie the name Jaleesa to the meaning of Elizabeth. My parents didn't make up my name. According to my mom, I was originally supposed to be named Lisa, but after having the name choice criticized by one of my mom's friends at the time for being too boring, she decided to name me after the well-liked character off of a network comedy show that was airing at the time, and it was called A Different World. Now, A Different World was a show that aired on NBC from the years 1987 to 1993, and it focused on a mostly Black cast as they navigated life as an HBCU, which is short for Historically Black College. The sitcom is now deemed a classic by some members of the Black community, and it was an initial motivator for many young viewers to later attend HBCUs. By the way, the show is currently aired, can be found on Amazon Prime if anyone's interested. Do check it out, but do yourself a favor and skip the first season because it's not that good. But the rest of it is, I swear. But I love this show. Not just because it contains my namesake, but because I don't know. There might be critics of the show that might say that the show skews towards wholesomeness and cheesiness in many of its episodes, but I also think that it hit on a lot of hard hitting issues that affected the Black community back then and still affect it today. It even had an episode that kind of focused on rioting when the LA riots were popular in 1992, I think. So yeah, I think it was very forward thinking for its time. And plus there was a love story between two characters, Dwayne Wayne and Whitley Gilbert. And I just think their relationship goals, I just love them. So the cast was great in my opinion, but yeah, but I really love the character Jaleesa. I guess I'm biased. She was smart, independent, hardworking. She could keep a man. She had some of the best one-liners in the show. She, Jaleesa, as a character on the show, was older than the average undergrad college student, but she still served as a dear friend and a role model to our fellow characters. And even to this day, I strive to be like the character Jaleesa, because I grew up seeing her on TV, and seeing her kind of like instilled into my mind that it's never too late to strive to be your best and to live your dreams. So this is really getting to the heart of kind of why I kind of talked about my name. I think that I have a firm belief that positive Black representation is important, um, in the media and everywhere, I guess. I once had a conversation with a stranger about my name. It was a white woman who had immediately heard that my name and realized that it was connected to the show that I mentioned earlier. And that was rare for me, because usually when I hear comments like that, it's from people who are like my parents' age, and they're usually Black like me. But the woman did say something that kind of thought, I guess, was supposed came off as a joke to her, or just something to say in jest. And she said something like, "You're lucky that the character you're named after storyline never went downhill." Um, and if it did, it would probably I would never lived it down, personally. I guess the lady didn't mean that much by it, but when I heard it, it kind of put me in a strange place. There's so many negative representations of Blacks in mainstream media, that it's not uncommon to see Blacks in movies represented as thugs or hood rats, or as less attractive, smart, and successful than their on-screen white counterparts. But but even though there are a handful of Black characters in the media that are positively portrayed like the ones in A Different World, for some reason they don't have the foothold that um, the negative ones have in mainstream society. And for some people, it who who aren't really exposed to Black people, they might not have a lot of Black friends or neighbors or associates. I feel like the media might serve as a shorthand to how they interpret Blacks to be really like. Um, I once had a white classmate that said that our textbook was wrong about some historic facts about Black people, and she justified this by saying that she watched a lot of BET. And so I guess that made her an expert on Black people. And her experience watching BET to her was more significant than even academic sources or even firsthand accounts from actual Black people. So I kind of found that weird. And I even had a complete stranger insist that I was lying about me and my parents being from the United States, because I was perceived to be, by this person, to be too sweet and too well spoken to be from here. Um, but according to articles in recent articles in places like the Washington Post or the Scientific Journal magazine, it states that white sounding names get less rejected over Black sounding names when being reviewed for job applications and financial loan applications. This is why my mother went through a phase during my life where she regretted naming me Jaleesa. She had a fear that the name was going to get coat me and perceive for people to for, that she was afraid that people were going to see my name and assume that I was ghetto, or it might unknowingly limit my chances of success before I was old enough to even do anything about it. As a young child, um, however, there was a period of time where I sensed that people were treating me differently because of my name and the way that I looked. It made me sad, because I wanted to be seen um, as equal by everyone, and I had just like a strong desire to be liked by everybody. But from a young age, I knew that the world we live in wouldn't allow for that to happen. Um, but at the same time, at a very young age, my mom took me to church, and that's where I became a Christian. And it was in church growing up where I learned that God loves us all equally, and that he gave his only son to save the whole world. And by reading Bible verses like Galatians 3:28, um, I learned that that as Christians, we are called to treat everyone with the same level of equality and kindness. And it makes me glad that that God's ways are not the ways of man. And it is my faith in God that helps me navigate through the tough times and gives me comfort in a time of adversity. I'm far from perfect, but with God's grace, I try to navigate this world one day at a time. So that's all I really have to say. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jaleesa. Last and certainly not least is our brother Ruben.
Hi. Whoa. Anyways, hi. So I guess I wanted to touch in my story, my sharing. I wanted to touch more about on the portrayal of Black people, especially African American and African, by Hollywood. And I guess most of you know that I did not grow up here in the state. I guess background on me, I grew up in Congo. I'm from Congo. I lived in Congo is in Central Africa. I lived in East Africa, a small country that apparently every American knows by the name of Djibouti. I lived there, and then after that, I live in Benin, which is in West Africa, and then I came here 2012. Anyways, growing up, I guess through watching a lot of like Hollywood movies and all that, growing up, I guess I realized, or I guess the only thing that I thought of, Black people in the state, mainly African American, was that they were usually either they were thugs, they were always on drugs, or like basically Black in America rhymes with trouble, like prison, shooting, guns, and all that. And then that was my idea of Black people in the state because of like the media and what I saw on TV. And then I came here. So coming here, my thought was always, to stay out of trouble, I gotta avoid Black people. I have to avoid African American and all that. But then also coming here, that's when I noticed also that, African are not portrayed. The portrayal of African is not the best. It's probably like the worst or whatever. African are usually portrayed by Hollywood as being, I guess, lower than I guess anybody else, as being savages, as being as being wild, uncivilized, and all that. Because I know people used to ask me the dumbest question ever, like, did you, I don't know, when you were in Africa, did you, I don't know, have electricity? Did you see rain before you came here? Of course I saw rain. Rain's everywhere. Did you used to like run after your meal? I'm like, what? Did you used to like hunt your meal? I'm like, no, you go to the market, you buy it. Anyways, like these questions, they used to like bug me a lot. And I used to be like, what is happening in this country? And like those questions used to come from everyone, like Black, Asian, and white people. And then at the same time, me with my, I guess, perception of African American, I was like, okay, I gotta avoid these people because it seemed like trouble and all that. But then I guess the more I live there, the more I see like racism in this country, the more I see like how like, portrayal of minority in Hollywood is not the best way to go if you want to learn about like other minorities. Don't do that. But the more I learn about that and the more I learn about how African who were being portrayed here, the more I started to see that all of this were wrong. They were not representative of what people are actually like. Because one, I realized, whatever Hollywood shows about other African, I'm just like, I live there. I know we're not like this or whatever. And then interacting with more people as I continue to live in the set, I'm just like, whoa, wow, Hollywood is not good. What the heck? But whatever. Yeah. So I just, learned a lot of stuff like that. That's one thing I wanted to touch on. Anyways, I did not really structure this thing because I don't know, I had like unexpected stuff happen in the afternoon. But anyways, the other thing I wanted to briefly mention was on my thought concerning everything that has been happening. I guess the main thing, well, there's two things. One is that I guess I've come to the conclusion that police brutality is a thing in the state. It's not, I used to think like it was always exaggerated and all that, but then now I'm like, well, it's not exaggerated. It's real. It's really happening. And the other thing was that, no matter how much injustice, racism there is in the state and all that, I've come to the conclusion that the Lord has a purpose for every people group, Black, white, Asian, but especially Black, because I don't know, that's why I was thinking a lot about, well, like God has a purpose for Black in America, Black people in Brazil, Black people in the world, and that, no matter what, the Lord's gonna bring that purpose about that he has for Black people to this country, that he has for Asian people and white people, the Lord's gonna do it. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ruben. So we're gonna enter a time into Q&A. So again, we're gonna first go through questions that people have submitted beforehand, and we picked out a few. So we'll do that for the first half of our time for 30 minutes, and then 30 minutes for you guys to be able to ask any questions. And again, you can ask it in this setting, or if you want to privately message me, there's a chat function on Zoom that you can do that. You could also ask anonymous questions. So thank you for everyone who submitted questions. The first question is, what are your thoughts on Black privilege? So I think the person here was, we had a few questions on this actually, and they were specifically asking about the differences between Black immigrants versus African Americans who grew up here. And there's like this perceived privilege that they have, especially in the realm of sports and etc. Yes, what are your thoughts on Black privilege?
Okay. Hi guys. Yeah, this question came up, and one of the first things that came to mind, or at least one of the things that was also asked, was specifically in the realm of sports. So this is an interesting question because it assumes that because let's talk about affirmative action specifically. My issue with the idea of Black privilege is that it ignores all of the things that made programs such as affirmative action and those things necessary. Because if it wasn't for the fact that Black people have been treated so badly for so consistently across most of our history, yeah, these these programs wouldn't even be necessary. Um, yeah, and I could go into history lessons again, but like I said, I'm gonna try and avoid that. Um, uh, yeah, and specifically with the whole affirmative actions in sports thing, trying to zero in on that because I think that's one of like the bigger examples. For the most part, people get this idea of Black people in this country as like being like sports stars and like they're all like rich and like they have so much money because like they're all making sports, but like that doesn't go to everybody. There's a very small select group of people. Even then, the whole concept of uh, affirmative action being like an equalizing force in some way is so bizarre. So let's talk about, let's kind of like go through the process here. You're a Black person applying to a college, you get in, through affirmative action. Most of the time, like that is only so that you can play sports for a school to make money for that school. Oftentimes, in fact, a lot of the colleges, or I think we were talking about this on the panel earlier, a lot of the times it's just, the Black people that you see in school, like, or in college arenas or things of that nature are here because they play a sport and they make the school money. So I don't necessarily think that we should even use like sports as like as a reason to be like, oh no, see, Black people are completely equal. You know what I mean? Yeah, my thoughts on Black privilege is that it doesn't really exist. That's about it. That's my thoughts. Did someone else have something else?
Leah, you're on mute.
I was speaking to myself. Wow, wonderful. So this is Leah. For those of you who don't know, I am Ruben's twin sister. So I was born and raised, as Ruben said, in the Congo, then live in Djibouti, then live in Benin, and then came here when I was 15. So so this question basically includes different other questions that we got. And one of the questions that we got that I felt strongly about was one where there was almost a comparison between Nigerians' life in America and how much more successful they are compared to African American. Although I'm not Nigerian, I think here I think we share similarities in terms of the mindset that we have when you come here. And this is not just something that's particular to me or my family, but it's also something, a mindset that I've seen in my friends. When I was at Temple as an undergraduate, I was part of a club called Society of Emerging African Leaders. And their dominant nationality was Nigerian. So we had this type of conversation before where we sort of analyzed like what everyone's mindset was coming here, what our goals were, etc. So what I can say from an immigrant perspective is that when we come here, our number one goal is to succeed. We don't want to let all the things, like minor details, affect us. And it's almost as if we were on a mission. And we oftentimes compare ourselves to our brothers and sisters who are still at home. And we realize how much privilege we are compared to them. We're privileged to be here. We're privileged to have running water and electricity every day. We're privileged to have food. We're privileged to have an education. Something like a bachelor degree that take 4 years here in my country can easily take you times 2 8 years because of all the conflict that's happening, all the protests and everything that's happening there. And usually we really value education, and we see as almost as the key to success, the key to a better life. And so when you come from a place where you've seen the struggle, your parents have seen it, they want you to do better. So when we come here, our goal is to do better. So we don't have that mindset, oh, we're gonna be different from Black American or anything. It's more so that we want to do better. We want to have good jobs. We want to have good grades so we can make our family proud, so we can make everyone proud. And obviously, so we can send some money home. And usually when we're here, and even anywhere back home, there's a huge pressure that our family puts on us. First of all, when it comes to like career wise, there are some careers that are like well better seen than others, and that's across the continent. They like family would rather want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. Yeah. Sometimes architect. So one of those.
Entrepreneur.
Yeah, so one of those. So if you come to them with other things, other jobs, like, I don't know, like a blogger, YouTuber, like YouTuber now, it's like a big thing. It's almost seen as a disgrace unless it does pay off and you become rich and you have a lot of money and you can give back to them and stuff like that. Otherwise, there's a lot of pressure to like perform and to achieve and to just like win awards, whether it be leadership, academic, all those things. So there's really a pressure to do well, and I think that's what's driving those numbers. And also saw something else about sports and stuff, about how Black were dominating the sports field. And it's very funny. I find it interesting because back home we don't really like see we don't really see sport as almost like an alternative. It's really like, unless you're like super talented in that specific sport, families usually don't want you to like go into sport. And it's very funny to see like how different our mindset are based on if we're African American or we're Black, we're African. And obviously that's not to say that one is better than the other. That just shows like there are differences, but also there's also a lot of similarities. But yeah, that's my perspective on that specific question.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Next question is, what do you think about defunding the police?
Oh, yeah, so that was me. I guess short answer, I have to acknowledge, no. But the longer answer, there's like two schools of thoughts in terms of defunding the police. Defunding in this dictionary definition of stopping funding completely, and then the other school of thought of lowering funding. And stopping funding is not something that I'm for. I don't know too many people that are for having an completely unfunded police, but definitely in favor of a lowering of police budget, or allowing it, looking through it and making sure that it's more efficiently funded, like most government programs. So it's not really an exceptional thing for as far as the police. So the movement of like completely abolishing the police, absolutely not. But in terms of police reforms, one thing that we see a problem with is just the unwritten rules in policing, where like if a bad cop like gets seniority, similarly to the George Floyd case, which I'll go into a little in a minute, any cops that are among them or like that are working with them don't really have that authority like most jobs in which you can report bad behavior among one of your coworkers without some form of retaliation or being fired. So one thing that I was looking for the George Floyd case, you look at the 4 officers involved. Derek Chauvin, the man who had his neck on George Floyd, was the most senior officer by far of those 4 officers. The Asian officer Tong Tao, he was the second most with like 8 years of experience, 8 to 10 years of experience, and the other 2 officers were basically brand new. And the unwritten rules in terms of policing is that it's very, very difficult to, you know, really call out or hold those more senior officers accountable without that blowback on you, and you risk being reprimanded despite the fact that you're in the right, or being fired despite the fact that you're in the right. I actually, one of the things that I've been recently talking to is one of our brothers, and I'm allowed to say his name because I asked him. So Billy, I just asked him how he's dealing with it because he hasn't really been on the police force very long in Philly. And that was one of his issues right now. Hello. Okay, I'm gonna answer the question. All right. Sorry, I'm at my uncle's house, so we're actually about to head out now. So that was my mom. Where was I? Oh, so I think one of the issues that he was talking about is that there's a lot of corruption and a lot of just this bad culture in the police force that's driving him to quit. And just that, like, people like politically in the force is really a lot of them, not, and of course not all of them, but a lot of them like want to have that appearance of doing well and protecting and serving, but not actually doing hard work of doing that. And for many officers, it's either dejecting them, keeping a lot of them wanting to, pressuring them to fall in line and not really speaking out, or just driving them from like policing altogether and trying to fix the force from within. So yeah, there are a lot of written rules that are to protect, that are supposed to keep police from acting in a racist manner, but there are unwritten rules that undermine that more senior officers, if anyone like has those racist tendencies or just are bad cops, that if they keep an okay record, not even a great record, but if they keep at least an okay enough record to not actually be to stay on the force and not be kicked off the force for inexcusable behavior when they actually do those more heinous acts, officers that are around them that are less senior than them can't really stop that or interject with that, just because even with video evidence, sometimes it would still be a he said, she said type of deal. And that, I think that's really one of the issues that we have. As far as defunding the police, no, there's like plenty of reforms in terms of training and just reforms that allow police to hold each other accountable. But as far as abolishing the police, no.
I'm also gonna jump on this question if I can. I think one of the things that doesn't really get talked about is that, you know, we don't necessarily have to see this particular issue eye to eye, like to, you know, respect each other's opinion. Like as much as I, you know, like, you know, I agree with Sharma on some places and I disagree with him in other places, and that's like fine. And you know, I don't think like, you know, every Black person has like a uniform like idea of like how to go about this. Me personally, I'm definitely a little bit more on the defund side, mostly because I think, you know, our police forces are overly militarized. They have way too much access to gear that they don't really need or shouldn't be using. I also am a little bit more, you know, I don't know. I think even just in our recruiting process, like I think it's, you know, something about our recruiting process is attracting people who are are used to abusing power and enjoy that. And so, you know, obviously, so I think personally, I'm a little bit more defund the police. But you know, Charmer doesn't have to think that way. Jiro doesn't have to think that way. No one on this panel has to think that way. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think, you know, keep in mind that we are capable of having like more than one opinion. You know, more than just one uniform idea. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we could move on to the next question. Next question is, did you have any experiences in GCC that you felt like you didn't belong, especially because the majority of church attendees are Asian? What can the church do to support you better?
Okay. So after talking with the panel previously, I expressed the specific situation that I had, and it seems like everyone was in agreement with it, and so I decided I was going to answer this one at least. So I would say the most stressful part for me in regards to GCC in general is the fellowship after service. I find myself a lot of the times making the first move. And that's generally not a problem for me most of the time. I am extroverted, but I do feel for other Black brothers and sisters who are introverted. It is very hard. But I found myself a lot of time feeling a sense of not being wanted to talk to. I have been shared with other people that I have been told I have been unapproachable. I don't know why, but it is what it is. But it's trying to figure out the logistics of going to eat and things like that. I feel like that I'm just included as an afterthought, not actually the feeling of me, like, I want your presence here. And it's like almost a situation where I know I would not have been invited to such things if I wasn't standing next to someone that someone else previously asked to hang out. And it would be semi-rude to not ask the person next to them for an event. And so I think just reaching out and not being afraid the first move would actually be very helpful. Like, there was this one time where even Leia and Adiro came up to me, and I was literally staying in the room by myself, and I was like, oh my goodness, thank you goodness, because literally I was about to just dip and leave because it was just getting too much for me. And I was literally counting down the seconds. And so yeah, it's just a feeling of sometimes I just don't feel like wanted. Yeah. In ways to kind of support, I think it's just reaching out and just not being afraid to make the first move. Introduce us to your friends. We're nice, I promise. we're so nice. Like, if people know me, I'm the goofiest person ever. Like, and so yeah, that would be my advice in regards to supporting us and making us feel like we're part of the GCC family.
Did anyone else want to share? No, okay. We can, before we move on to opening up the floor, you guys can start thinking about whatever questions that you would want to ask our panelists. But a few people actually asked, would you ever date/marry a person outside of your race, assuming they are Christian?
I can go first in answering this question. Um, would I ever date someone who's Christian but not black? The answer to that is yes, because well, one, because the love of the Lord, that's one. But then two, also because I guess for me, I don't equate, um, let's say, for example, Belgium colonized Congo, and they did a lot of atrocities. I don't equate the fact that um, the king who, you know, made that a legal thing and all that, I don't equate, I guess, him being evil to all Belgian people are evil and I should avoid them. And yeah, so pretty much I don't know, if the person is Belgian, love the Lord, I'm willing to date the person. However, my main problem is cultural stuff. Like, I think for me, I also look a lot of like culture. If the person is open to other culture, accepting of other cultures, um, yeah. And also, I guess one thing that I look a lot into is, are you gonna, love my culture? Are you gonna be into my culture and all that? So I guess for me, if the person is like, reserved in terms of culture and all that, I guess that you can be whatever race. I won't really be too interested in you. I will just, go away, walk away. But yeah, that's pretty much my speech.
I'm gonna stick with it on this one too. I have dated someone who has been white. And my answer is still yes. Similar to how Charmer was talking about how he wanted to be seen as an individual and not a group of people, I treat it very much similar with any race for that matter who I end up with. I look at the person and the person only, and that is enough for me. One thing I would add with that, if you so choose, there is a sort of responsibility that comes with dating someone who is Black, knowing the culture, similar to what Ruben was talking about, being an ally, like especially if you end up having a child with this person, that is part of their culture too, and you need to respect both equally, especially since the school systems really teeter more towards the white history, and so just making sure you have that equal is very important. But yes, love the person. Don't a stereotype. Yeah.
I'm also gonna throw my hat into this one. Long answer, or sorry, short answer, yes. Long answer, uh, kind of echoing Ruben's thoughts. Like there are cultural barriers to that. I think, um, I mean, obviously, I told you guys a story earlier about the time that I dated a white female. But at the same, but there are other stories that go with that. Um, yeah, I think one of the things that I think everyone kind of goes through this when they start to date someone, especially if they're of like a different race, and you think to yourself like, what will my parents say? That happens for me too. I um, I remember going to college and like my parent and like my mother and all of my aunts like sitting me down and saying like, hey, you can date anyone, but please, 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 please don't bring home a white girl. That was what they told me. I uh, actively don't listen to them often. Um, but yeah, one of the things that um, I think they had on their mind when they said that was, like their family's own history with dating people outside of their race. I know uh, my mother has a brother who dated someone who was white, and they were living in a different time. But I mean, honestly, if now is any indication, times are not really that different. But they were living in a different time. She claimed that he was violent and abusive, um, and he went to jail for a long time. That same thing happened to my own brother. And he didn't go to jail. He is not in jail, but he is in trouble often now with the law because he dated someone of a different race, and her word will always win against his. So I can understand the fear that my parents would have if I told them I was dating someone who was white. At the same time, and not just white, but of any race really. At the same time, I do think you should love through that. I do think you should love the person that you love through that, regardless. Yeah, I think that's just the truth. I think being a Christian calls us to that, to love people above what they look like, or even past your own personal hurts. So yeah, definitely date someone outside of my race. So
Yeah, I guess for me, sorry, I'm like getting ready to leave. Um, yeah, just similar to like what Ashley was saying, referencing to me, it would be very hypocritical for me to say no to this question. um, and yeah, so absolutely yes. And I actually have dated someone outside of my race, and I did have the issue of in anticipating of meeting her parents. She was Asian, and I did have that I guess that anticipation of that anxiety about meeting her parents because I didn't know if they were going to accept me. Well, it was actually very relief to know that like her stepfather is also black, so it actually helped a lot. But yeah, similar to what Ashley was saying, yeah, just understanding culturally, and then similar to what and that goes both ways because like I said, I have an uncle who actually did not approve of me being in an interracial relationship. I think his mindset was that I'm supposed to not look at each person as an individual, but I am supposed to, I guess, assess every black single sister that I meet before I even consider dating outside of my race. But I think that just is a foolish way of going about dating. So yeah, quick answer. I also say yes, I would absolutely date someone outside my race.
All right. All right. We will open it up to the floor. And we already had a great question come in. So the question is, are there certain words / phrases / slang that you feel that non-Black people shouldn't use? Obviously not certain blatantly racist terms, but more slang like lit, fleek, etc.
Quick, okay, well, quick answer then. Um, yeah, everyone should and can use, slang like lit, flick, and all that. I, I don't know. To me, I'm just like, it's part of English. Let's use it.
Yeah, similar sentiment with Ruben. It's like, it's honestly your personality. If your personality is like capturing, and like the best way you could feel is like, I feel litty, then yeah, of course. But like, if you are not about that certain word, this is just a life advice. I wouldn't say you use it because it's gonna be painfully obvious for you. But yeah, of course. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think anyone wants to like bar people.
Just a Modelo.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to like bar anyone from using like certain words or like certain phrases. I think that's kind of like ridiculous. But what I will say is that usually when those like things come out, and this goes into just general like not just words and phrases, but also like hairstyles and things of that nature. Like usually when those things first come out, like Black people are made fun of for them. Like so it's not like yeah, and then someone else uses it it becomes
Oh,
popularized by
definitely.
other people, and then you know, like we still bear the brunt of that disdain for it. So like, yeah, I'm not saying anybody shouldn't say lit. Like, you know, some things are lit. Like if the situation's lit, it's lit. But yeah, just kind of keep in mind, like, you know, that does still happen. So yeah, that's it.
If I would quickly add, I was trying to think of a term that, like, or a situation that it would be offensive, and if it is, like, since we're talking about race tied with race, I would say no, except for if it's like rooted in like a stereotype. You know, it's like I remember some friends who were like outside of the race. They were just like trying to relate or like poke fun or be like, I just feel like I'm loving me some chicken. I know you feel me, right, Ejiro? And I'm just, if it's rooted in stereotypes, obviously, like plausible, if you think like, oh, she's gonna find this funny or he's gonna find this funny because he's Black, if that like runs through your mind, and it's the same thing with us. Oh, I think she's gonna relate to this because like he's Korean and it's like they're known for this. That's the type of thing you pause, you know, and it's just like, do I really know the person well enough? Do they know me well enough if this is like actually the right move or something to say?
Yeah, rule of thumb for me is, sorry, I think it's okay. There we go. Rule of thumb is if you don't feel natural saying a slang term, don't use it, no matter what race you are. It's not natural for me to say fleek. I've never used it, so I wouldn't say it. But yeah. But and also if like, you know, the first time you're using that type of slang is because you're around a certain set of people, that's also really bad. So, but if you just like a phrase and you use it no matter who you're around, I see no issue with it. So you shouldn't be barred from it.
That's a great question. Anyone else have any questions?
So I'm still on the call. That's why I was like,
No, Charmer, we appreciate your answer.
sorry, I keep doing stuff. Let me get a second. You can mute me if I can't mute myself.
I'm going to mute you.
Thank you.
Oh, another great question that's also related. Where do you draw the line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation?
Wait, I want to speak on that because cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. Anyways, so I guess growing up, like I went to my last school before coming here was a French international school. So we had like French teachers, they were white. And then I used to see that as normal. But I noticed a lot of them would wear African clothing. So, well, I wish I had pictures, but they would wear African clothing. I don't have pictures, but anyways. But me, as a kid, back then, even now, I still see that as normal. But then I think that, I don't know, to me, that's normal. If you wear African clothing, you're not African, you're not Black. To me, I'm just like, oh, that's fine. You do you. But I think cultural appropriation would be, for example, like back, you know, when, you know, all of Africa got colonized. For example, I know like in Nigeria, there used to be a kingdom called Benin Kingdom. So when Great Britain colonized Nigeria, they looted their capital and took away all their gold, silver, all their like jewelry, basically all their art, and like a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of the stuff that are like in like museum in Great Britain are usually from Africa. And that, well, I won't really call it a cultural appropriation, but it's just like, to me, that's just like not okay. It's pretty, I don't know, it gets me mad a little bit, because then this country that like looted and stole from like a lot of like those kingdoms back in the days tend to be those countries that usually look down upon like African countries, African people, Black people, and it's just, I don't know, it just annoys me a lot. Yeah.
I have a little bit to say on that too. For me personally, it doesn't bother me like too much. Like, I usually just go with the phrase, like, if you can rock it, then so be it. But also, there, like, for example, with like, I know like braids comes up a lot, like the box braids or whatever. I've seen a couple of those, and the thing that bothers me is the fact that there is still Black students to this day that get expelled from schools just having braids, or just having their hair out, because I know there's even some people doing like frozen things that aren't naturally to them and stuff like that. I'm still honestly on the fence a lot of the times, and I guess this goes towards what Brandon was sharing earlier about like we're all not in agreement, but also it's still a question to like, is that still like, that's something internally for me that I'm still trying to work through. Like, should I be upset about that? Should I be more angry or upset about that? And so that's my 2 cents on that.
Whenever
For
I get
me,
that,
oh, go
no,
for it. Go for it.
don't worry, Brandon. It's all yours.
No, go for it. It's fine.
Unmute yourself to say go for it. Oh, I'll be quick. Similar to Ashley, because I know it's like with the topic of braids, but my mind goes to like, I would say that period in the early 2000s when a lot of Black culture was like intertwined slash highlighting with Japanese, like anime culture to be particular. Like there's Afro Samurai. It was like a thing to put your hair in 2 buns and you have like chopsticks in it, you know? So I was just like, would that be cultural appropriation if we're gonna be calling a spade, like if we're gonna be doing it evenly, you know? So I feel like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like the internet culture in a general wants us to get upset or wants, I don't know, I feel like as a Black woman wants me to get upset every time I see a white girl with braids, if I'm being frank. And I'm just like, I'm not gonna pluck it out of her head, you know. I can't like take off her dashiki or something like that, because I think about my friends who are white, and like every time I wear a dashiki, and like when my family travels, like go back to Nigeria and bring me gifts, I like literally I would give her one, because I'm like, you're my friend, and I know you always wanted one of this, and I know like you're just actually like appreciating and just like you love the way it looks and you think it's pretty. I know it's not, you're not gonna market it as your own, you know. So I just feel like for me it's more of like honestly seeing the good in people, in terms of like more likely than not, like this person just really thinks this style is cool, you know, the same way I think like anime is cool and like I'll try to copy a hairstyle back in the day. But until like they want to like market it as their own, you know, and I say they in terms of like anyone's, that's of course when it becomes like, all right, you're appropriating it now.
Yeah, to echo your thoughts, one of the things that I think really starts like the conversation on um, appropriation is like, where does the credit go? I think that's a big one. And then also just kind of like marketing from it. I think there is like a point, and you were saying like, I mean, in other, America's like a very big country. We have a lot of different people here, and there's going to be like melding of different like cultures, and that's fine. That's what we're supposed to do. I don't think that's a problem. What is a problem is when these things like happen with no credit towards like the people who like the culture that did create these things. For instance, or we were talking about braids earlier, but I think a lot of people forget that, like, when slaves came over, the braids in their hair were like used to mark what tribe they came from, or what like area of Africa they came from, and people don't know that. People have absolutely no clue. It's just a style for them. But yeah, and then like they use that style, and then they're the most popular thing on the internet just because they have braids. But then you completely forget about the people who started that. So I think for me, a lot of it comes down to like credit and like um, you know the marketing of it and kind of just like using it for your own gain. Um, yeah, um, yeah, that's pretty much it. I do think that there's like room for melding the cultures. I do think that there's room for people to um, see something that they like and want to try it. I do think that's like fine. Like I mean, we were Jiro was just saying like she likes anime, so I love anime. Uh, but uh, like I'm not gonna like I don't know, fly to Japan, start speaking Japanese, and like start an anime company. I don't know anything. I'm not gonna go like crazy. Um, but yeah, I think there's room for melding of cultures. But I think appropriation comes down to that line of like, where does the credit go, and do you recognize that?
All right, we have another great question that came in. This is really long, but really good. So, question is, Du Bois wrote about double consciousness, which is emotional and psychological burden created from a sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in contempt and apathy, particularly for people caught between the white world and the world of color. Do you share this experience? Thoughts?
Could you read the question again? Hold on.
Yeah. Let me copy and paste it into the chat.
I can start while P. Chris is doing that. I believe my experience is identical to that. Very much so. I tend to change my behavior and think of how the person looks at me through their eyes. I constantly think that way. It's weird now because nowadays I'm just doing me and what is naturally me and not considering other people, because half the time they're probably not even thinking it. But mine comes from a lot. For Black women, we get stereotyped the angry Black woman. Me expressing a justified frustration with something, and there's like a miscommunication with cultural how we express that. I get already chucked up as, why are you so angry? Why do you have to talk that loud? Why like it comes off to other people that I'm aggressive. And so because I navigate through both white community and Black community, I always end up suppressing a lot of my anger. Because I'm considering the other person. It's like, I don't want to startle them by my anger, even if it's justified. And then, it's literally, I'll be going in, like even going to a store, just my demeanor alone could be considered a threat to some people. I there were plenty of times where people told me I should smile more. I would seem more approachable. But even in stores, I would go out of my way to greet somebody at the cash register, because I'm thinking, well, if I just walk in and just mosey on around with my just plain old face, they're gonna find me suspicious. And there were times where I would look in corners and there would be the shop owner peeking over, and I would just be like, okay, I'm going to change how I look. So yes, that quote literally speaks volumes to my experience. There's a lot of mental hula hoops you go through with all that. That could have permanently affect your mental state.
I 100% agree with that quote. Yeah, I think Yeah, pretty much everything that Ashley said. Yeah, I just 100% agree with that. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with code switching and things of that nature. But I think I don't even have anything else to say. I just agree 100%. My experience has always been like, in front of one group of people, I am going to be much more like outgoing and like nice and like try to like, uh, not necessarily win their approval, or maybe that is what I'm doing. I don't know. But like, I'm gonna try and like present myself as like this incredibly like uh nice person so that like they don't think of me as like suspicious or dangerous or like a threat to them somehow. Uh I Someone once told me that when I talk, I have a friend at home that once told me that like when I talk to certain people, my voice gets a little bit higher just because it seems less threatening. And I noticed that I actually do that. Like I just make myself sound a lot less threatening all the time. Um, yeah, and that's 100% true. I definitely do agree with that. Seeing myself in both, for how I see myself, and also through trying to like perceive like how someone else would see me. Uh, as of late, um, I'm trying to care about that a lot less because I'm gonna do me. But yeah, yeah. But for a long time that was the case. So
All right, another question. Do you see well-intentioned behavior from allies that may not be productive?
Um, right off the bat, and as like thinking about it more, hopefully it'll get fleshed out. But the constant like apologizing for whiteness. I know like the intention behind it, like I remember that's why sometimes like I don't know, like people who like went to undergrad at Penn, I only speak for myself, sometimes going into these spaces that are designed to be safe spaces, where like allies will come in, and particularly like white allies, it'll just be like before they introduce their names, they're like, I'm grateful that I'm here in this space and I apologize for my white ancestors and white. I'm just like, girl, we understand that you're not a slaveholder or anything like that. But for me, I just feel like, honestly, when I hear language like that, I just feel like, all right, we're just playing into like over, I don't know if it's like not even, I think we're playing into like politics, and just like be straightforward, like, hey, I see you as a human and I know that this sucks. But just like the over apologizing or quote unquote like the white guilt or something like that, it's just like, say it straight. I'm seeing you as a person and I acknowledge the fact that you're here, you're seeing me as a person, and I respect that already. We don't need to like play or like make it awkward by just being overly apologetic.
I found that a lot of people who have displayed the whole extremely apologetic, it's almost as if it's like a cry for to validate themselves, to say, I'm a good person, tell me I'm a good person. And no one's arguing that. If you know you're a good person, then move on. You don't have to get that validation from Black people. If you know it, then you know it. But to get a validation from us, I find that's usually the intention behind the white guilt or the apologizing for the ancestors. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Yeah, there's a part where I almost, when I see some of the hyper focus of white privilege, I actually start to get a little insulted. Um, it's almost like it's it almost gets to a point. It's like, do you not realize that I also have agency and that, yeah, there are barriers but they're not completely overcomable barriers that it almost feels like a parent talking to a child to me. And I'm really not with that. It's when we talk about race relations, we as Black people are like, we don't really need you to like push me to the finish line. We just need you to remove the barriers so that we can get there on our own without tripping over all the barriers. So when I see like that hyper focus on white privilege, it almost swings. It almost, in my mind, I'm almost feeling like a swinging of the pendulum all the way to like, this almost feels like you're acknowledging whites are superior instead of just saying we have things to fix. And that's where it just starts to bother me. So.
Is it okay if I pose a question?
Can I answer before?
Of course.
Thank you. So for me, I think I would like a two-part answer to that. One that's very much in line with what Ashley and Adria said. And I feel like in my experience was more so that they wanted to express their anger, and it's almost as if they want me to know that their feelings are in line with mine. And more so specifically relating to things that happen in my country. So Congo for a long time, for a few years, the kid was King Leopold II, former king, long dead of Belgium, personal property. And while he ruled, he almost killed half of the entire population, performed atrocities and things very horrible. So I was forced because I didn't want to have those conversations with people where I told them, oh, I'm from Congo. All of a sudden, oh my God, what King Leopold did was so horrible, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I know what he did. Like, there's no need to like go again over those type of details. I already know. And they insist, there's that insistence on like, what he did was so horrible, what he did was so horrible. I'm like, I know, calm down. And so that's one thing. Two, this is like something I've like observed lately with what happened with George Floyd. It's almost like there's a wave of like almost like hypocrite behavior. All of a sudden, oh, you see a Black person, oh my God, what can we do for you? What can we do for you? Like all of a sudden you exist. I'm like, bro, like 2 weeks ago, did I know I exist to you? So we have to wait for this to happen for you to realize that I exist. And it really comes off as very hypocrite because I know once this is gone, this is forgotten, all of a sudden we're going back to square one. So this is something that just pisses me off because like you can tell where it's coming from, like when it's coming from like a sincere place where like the person just played ignorant, or where it's almost like, you know, there's a trend, I'm just gonna jump into the trend and act like all of a sudden, yeah, Black people exist and I want to make their life easier, blah blah blah. That is something that just pisses me off. Okay, Drew, back to you.
Honestly, that links a little bit to like my question. If there's like no other question to be posed, I know that the majority of our church are Asian, and it seems very readily that like a lot of the questions, it may seem very Black versus white. But are there any practices like if you want to be an ally that you're hesitant or you're unsure of? Like if you don't know, like, oh, is this okay for me to do as an ally? Is there any practices that you're unsure of that you want to like test the water or make sure that it's okay or something like that? Or you just want to get like an opinion? If you're an ally, you know, no pressure. Just like.
I have a question in regards to the question you posed. Can you define ally? Sorry, I have a thing with words. I want to know the definition.
Well, I know it constantly changes, especially within like, you know, the hyper liberal world. But for me, ally by definition is anyone you see that someone's humanity is being denied for some superficial reason, and you want to be an active force of like changing it, even though you may not necessarily be of that particular background or that particular creed in which that person is going to be denied their basic humanity. That's for me is a ally, a good friend, a real friend. That's basically it.
In the wise words of my family group leader, if you don't know where to look it up. And so I did. And so an ally is someone who is not a member of the underrepresented group, but who takes action to support that group. It is up to people who hold positions of privilege to be active allies to those with less access and to take responsibility for making changes that will help others be successful.
I have a question, Ichira. Maybe like a kind of potential situation to run by. I don't need to be like spotlighted or anything. If we're like just like out and about and we see an instance where there is somebody or something racist being done towards a brother or sister who's Black, or for any race for that matter, like. I guess I have a question of like, when is it my place and when is it more helpful to say something or to acknowledge and like act in that moment, or versus like look like give that person like the dignity and choice and like how they want to respond and follow that lead. I don't know if that situation is making sense, but sometimes I'm not sure, like, is it not my place to like jump in and call out every little thing that like I'm noticing, and is that productive, helpful? Does that actually come off as like allyship?
I hope that's okay. That's a good scenario. I will like hopefully. I hope I can answer your question, Michelle. Well, using an example, what happened to me recently. June 19th was officially announced as, I don't know if it was a federal holiday, but anyway, it was announced as a holiday, especially within Philadelphia. And I know that like within my work, we don't work on Fridays usually. It's like remote, but like for some reason they wanted to hold like an emergency meeting for something. And then my friend Ada, who is white, she was just like, oh, that Friday is an important holiday and it's like off, you know? So she spoke out in that like simple way. And for me, because like me being like immigrant mentality, I'm just like, shh, we gotta work, stop, you know? But I was just like, the fact that she like reached out and like actually verbalized it, I was just like, yeah, I appreciate you for that. And like, thank you for that. So obviously in terms of your approach, it does depend on like personality. Like if you feel like, hey, like if you feel emboldened and just like, actually, let me think before I talk. I would say the best way is to like, if you can, like just ask the person who you feel got affronted by it. It's like, hey, did that sit well with you? Because like from my view, like that looked like it was this. But if you're not feeling it, just like let me know, you know? Always just asking the person, because like once again, no one's a monolith. And it's just like you're trying to do the right thing. And it's very hard when all the definitions of how to be a great ally is always changing and you're just trying to do the right thing. So you speaking to the person and just checking in with them like first will always be like the right step in my book. Was that too generic? Did that make sense?
It made total sense. Thanks for your feedback.
I have a similar question, but did anyone want to answer that first before I ask another question? Okay. This first came up with the like anti-Asian sort of mentality when COVID-19 first happened. And then I started thinking about it a lot with the more recent anti-Blackness that's been occurring in the U.S. As a white face, I was, I guess, made aware of the protection that my presence could bring, which was kind of strange for me as a very small person. But I remember saying to some of my Asian American friends, like, do you want me to go to the grocery store with you so that no one will say something against you? And I felt somewhat more comfortable with my Asian American friends because there didn't always seem to be such a dissonance between like black or white and yellow, whereas there always seems to be like a stronger dissonance between black and white. And so I was curious what you guys felt about that. Like if I had said to like Ashley, who I consider a good friend, like, would you be more comfortable if I went to the grocery store with you? Would that come off as like sort of white savior mentality, or would that come off because I already have a relationship with you as like me trying to make you feel safer in a situation? And like how do you navigate that as an offer coming from a friend, but also an offer coming from a white friend? Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out personally, Ashley. You don't have to answer specifically.
I think when it comes down to it, um, when you're when offering gestures maybe to like Black people, I feel like there's often a kind of like a sense of authenticity. Blacks just want you to be honest and to be real and to be upfront with them. If this is your motivation, your desire to do this thing, and this person is really your friend, they're going to, even if they might side eye you a bit, they will understand that you're coming from a place that of an ally. So I would say, yeah, maybe it might come off as really weird, but do it anyway. I feel like a lot of us are doing these things for the first time. And when you do think, when you're learning, when you're getting to, when you practice any skill, the mistakes are going to happen. So it's just about taking that step, and that friend should see your authenticity and will help you through it. So
I think about a situation that a friend of mine has shared on Facebook. She is a Black woman, and she was saying that there was a time where she was pulled over by a cop, and the first person she called was her pastor, and he is white. And she just said the words, I'm being pulled over. I just want to let you know. And immediately he said, I'm going to be there. Don't do anything. I'll be there immediately. And similar to what Jaleesa was saying, it's all about your intention behind it. And if you do have that relationship with that person, it will come through. For me, personally, it's hard to accept. It's hard to ask for help. And so for me, if you want to put that out there, then I will gladly take it regardless. Because at the end of the day, it's my life on the line, and I'm not like, it is what it is. It's the situations where they make a show of it almost. That's when it's like, when it becomes obnoxious, that's when it kind of sends red flags. I'm like, all right, you a little suspicious there. but yeah, genuine. You have to just be genuine, and also just know the person that you're offering and reaching out that help to.
I'm trying to think about in cases in which like it's like a stranger though. Like, for example, like on my block, if I see like a Black man like on the ground, and this happened like initially like back in 2015 when like the first shootings of like Trayvon Martin, like that became publicized. He was sitting on the ground, African American, and like getting handcuffed, and he was crying. He was just like, please, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. You know? So it's in situations like that, I'm just like, this, it's where it gets tricky. But I feel like what Jaleesa said, especially like do it anyway. You know? That, I feel like that's hopeful. And honestly, like this is like advice for me, or like learning points for me as well, because like we're all new to it, and if we tangibly, it'll be such a big waste if we have all of this like talk and discussion, but yet we let like either fear get in the way, or it's just like, all right, this is not the situation that we thought of, so I'm not going to do anything. So yeah, I pray for all of us for boldness, you know, and like actually and wisdom as well. Very nice.
Let's start closing up our night. And I just want to let people know that this is not the end. That this is going to be something we're going to be continuing to do as a church family, is to figure out how do we move forward. And I do want to ask the panelists that what would you want to share with your church family? Because like, I don't want us to feel like, oh, this is like us and them. You know, these are the Black people in our congregation, and then us. Like how do, and then it creates this thing of like there's this like divide. But us as one church family, are there things that panelists feel like would be helpful for your church family to know about you, whether it's how best to move forward from here, how best to support you now, but it's just something that you want to share with your family?
Something I would want our church family to know is that I feel like I can at least speak for myself, but I hope that a lot of the panelists agree with me, that we're doing this out of a place of love, and out of a place of opening a conversation and continuing a conversation. I mean, we care. We want to hear your thoughts. We want a greater connection and understanding between the believers in this church. And I feel like I would have done this night if I didn't care so much about the CROSSRoads community, and seeing it just grow and flourish even more as we move forward.
I would first want to say thank you all for coming out. And honestly, like my experiences at GCC, like upon like dating back to the time I was a freshman, like this is a very loving community and a very open community. So it's not like this night is like, we need to talk because you guys are lacking. It's no, like we know we're sharing all these things because like as everything, like we sharing in our family groups, we trust all of us. We trust all of you guys, you know? And especially for people who may or may not know me, or especially people who do know me, it doesn't matter. If you do have any questions, or if we're chatting and if something comes up, like, yeah, you're feel free to ask any question. You know, it's not like, don't be hesitant in terms of like, oh, is this a stupid question? Or, oh, does this, yeah, do think, but like, or is this like inherently racist? But even if you do have those thoughts, we're gonna be imperfect, but it's rather that you like say something versus saying nothing and just like always have that unresolved like question. It's better to ask and like let us work it out together. And besides from emotions, we don't have the final answer. I feel like sometimes I feel like when I'm looped into these discussions, especially like in a non-Christian setting, it's like the Black person or the person whoever raises the center of attention, the person's like is the final say. But because we're brothers and sisters in Christ, like God's word is the final say. So we're just going to be doing this together, you know, looking back like ultimately at the end of the day, it's what he wants us to be unified. So I don't know if that rambling made sense, but I hope you feel my heart in terms of.
Wait, are we doing closing thoughts? Is that what it is?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I guess my closing thought is um, just to echo what was spoken earlier is definitely don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to multiple of us, as we've alluded to earlier. Our experiences are different. Some of our outlooks are a little bit different, and it's very helpful to just speak more than just to just one of us and think if you just speak to one of us, you don't have the full scope. Just because we all have different like takes on everything, just because our lives were different. And yeah, don't even let this be like the only time where like when the tensions are high be the only time. I do have like one experience of someone several years ago asking me about my experience in GCC as a Black person, and I still fully appreciate that tremendously to this day. Um, so yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. They're going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. And even if like you have uncomfortable things to share, that's okay too. But yeah, we definitely appreciate it.
Quick closing thought. One, I'm a firm believer that we can all love one another the way the Lord loved us, the way the Lord loves us. I'm a firm believer that, yeah, the church can love, the members of the church can love one another above, beyond race, beyond sex, beyond anything. And I guess one quick example is, you know how like when you're like good friends with someone and like you vibe a lot and that person is not of your race, but like when you're like good friends, it just doesn't matter because you get along so well and all that. You can, I don't know, it's like the other person is your twin and like, appreciate movement. Oh, that was private. Thank you. But anyways, yeah. What was I gonna say? Yeah. Well, yeah. I was just gonna say it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, when you're like good friends with someone, it legit doesn't matter if the person is big, small. I don't know, white, Asian, black. It just doesn't matter. You just get along. And I also say that a lot with kids. Like when I was a kid, I didn't care who I was playing with. As long as you were cool, I'm cool. We're cool. So let's go. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just a firm believer that, you know, if the Lord has saved us, well, I think one, He believes in us. You know, the Lord has saved us, and yeah, we can love one another beyond race, beyond all that. It is possible.
I don't really have much to say. Everyone eloquently expressed everything that's truly in my heart. But one thought I would say is something that I saw on this two pastors talking, and one of the pastors was saying how God created so many different people, and it's so diverse. And it's interesting that even though we have so much variety, people still tend to clump in places that are similar. And he challenged the thought to say that God created diversity so to, instead of picking up the culture, you pick up the kingdom. It's the action of choosing that besides the fact that we all don't look like, but we have that one commonality, and that is Jesus. And so we drop everything, all the superficial things, and we pick up the one thing that truly matters, which is Jesus. And so that's the thought I'm left with. But yes, I also, if there's anyone who has any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact me if you have anything. So love you guys.
For me, if I were going to say anything, I would just say just keep seeking opportunities to show each other grace. Yeah, I think, like everyone else was saying, there's going to be awkward conversations. There absolutely will be. And, if there weren't, I'd be more concerned. Yeah, so please just be open to correction and also be bold enough to correct. I think we have to show each other grace in this whole situation and in every aspect of our lives. So yeah, do that.
I think everyone almost covered everything. I think maybe one thing I will add, and that's sort of similar to what Brandon said about correcting yourself, is also being able to know and to check yourself, check your friend, check your close ones. I remember I saw a video where a girl was basically correcting a parent from saying things that were very discriminatory towards Black people, and she had the guts to check them. So I think it's not, it is good to one to show that you're an ally to your Black friend and stuff, but sometimes it might also be that maybe some of your loved one have unconscious bias, and if you see that, what do you say? If you're truly if you truly believe that those are wrongs, then maybe you should have enough bravery and courage to say something. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming out. Again, this is a family affair that we're having, that we're just getting to hear members of our own body who wanted to share about things that have been on their minds, on their hearts. And one thing I really want to emphasize is the craziness of the gospel, of how when the gospel brings transformation, it not only transforms your inner self, but it brings transformation to everywhere else around you, whether it's personal relationships, whether it's systemic things. But the gospel invades and transforms every area of life. And so usually people are on either spectrum. They're either focused on, let's dismantle all the broken systemic things, but then they don't really see the kind of the ugliness within their own hearts, of how they've let bitterness and anger and poison kind of affect themselves. Or people are so focused on themselves because they're gospel only is for the person, but they don't speak out against systemic things. But what we want to do is see the gospel as something that is not just for society or for the self, but gospel transforms every area of life. And we want to do that together healthily as a community, as we continue to have conversations, as we continue to seek what the Lord is trying to do. Yeah, so please let's continue to work at that together. If we could take a quick minute and say a prayer specifically for our community. Something that's been really on my heart as I've been praying for this night is the phrase that keeps coming over is the Father's heart. And I feel like that's really what God wants to give us in terms of how we should see everything going on, how we should respond to it ourselves is by understanding the Father's heart. How we should respond to it in Philly is understanding the Father's heart for our city. So if we could just take a minute and just pray, God, can you give me your Father's heart for everything going on. Yeah, we'll just take a quick minute and then I'll close this. God, I thank you that the Spirit who resides in us, resides in each believer, is the same Spirit that we see working in the Bible, is the same Spirit that we see calling truth to power, of speaking to religious leaders and government leaders about how they're mistreating citizens who are poor, that you spoke out against your own people, that they weren't loving their neighbors, that your Spirit was the one who brought healing and reconciliation. And this is a work of your Spirit. So God, we pray as our church continues to really seek what it means to have your heart for what's going on around the world, in our city, in our own community, and within our own hearts. God, we pray, would your Spirit be the one that's leading and guiding us? Would your Spirit be the one who's showing us and doing that work? And God, thank you that it doesn't take of just our effort alone, but God, I thank you that it's by your Spirit that's working these things. So God, we pray, would you come and fill each person here? Come and fill our community. God, may we be a community that really reflects you, your kingdom, what you're doing here in our own community. God, would we reflect that? In our city, would we reflect that? So God, thank you, God, for our night tonight. God, come and use our community for your kingdom and for your glory. God, we thank you, we praise you, pray all these things in Jesus' mighty, powerful, loving name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. I just want to say a big thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for preparing. Thank you for sharing a lot of stories that must have been hard to really process through and think through. Thank you for sharing it with our family. And hopefully we can continue to work together and fight together. All right, guys. Thank you. See you at service tomorrow, 10:30 a.m.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Chris.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.